There's a voice inside your mind that you've heard your whole life, one that speaks in your language, knows your history, and sounds so much like you that you've never once stopped to question whether it actually is. But what if it isn't? What if the voice that tells you you're not enough, that talks you out of every brave thing you almost did, that appears precisely at your weakest moments and knows exactly where to press? What if that voice was never yours to begin with? The ancient Gnostics, the mystics who were hunted, erased, and buried from history, had a name for this voice. They called it the Archon within. Not a metaphor, not a poetic symbol, but a precise description of a force they believed was deliberately installed inside the human psyche for one specific purpose: to keep your soul asleep. And what you're about to hear is the knowledge they died to preserve, the understanding that was burned from libraries, erased from scripture, and hidden in the Egyptian desert for over 1,000 years before the world was ready to find it. Again, in the summer of 1945, a young farmer digging near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt struck something solid beneath the soil, a sealed clay jar that had been sitting undisturbed for over 16 centuries. He hesitated before opening it because local legend spoke of spirits inhabiting such vessels, but eventually curiosity won. And what he found inside were 52 ancient papyrus texts wrapped carefully in leather, preserved by the dry desert air as though someone had intended them to last exactly this long. These were the Gnostic scriptures, the writings the early church had declared heretical and ordered destroyed. The documents that preserved a completely different understanding of God, of reality, of the human soul, and of the invisible forces working against it. They had survived because someone believed they were worth dying to protect. Someone wrapped them, sealed them, buried them deep in those cliffs without knowing if anyone would ever find them, without any guarantee that the knowledge would survive. And for 16 centuries, it waited. When scholars finally translated what became known as the Nag Hammadi Library, they found something that didn't fit the story history had told. Not just theology and not just mythology, but something far more unsettling: a detailed, precise map of the human mind, and a warning about forces that the Gnostics believed were operating inside every human being without their knowledge or consent. Forces they called Archons, from the Greek word for rulers. Not rulers of kingdoms or empires, but rulers of perception, architects of the inner world, invisible mechanisms that do not chain the body, but chain the mind. And their most dangerous instrument, the one these ancient texts return to again and again with something close to urgency, was not fear from the outside world. It was the voice from within. To understand what the Archon within actually is, you first need to understand the world the Gnostics believed you were born into, because without that context, what they were describing sounds like mythology, but with it, it starts to sound uncomfortably like a diagnosis. Before this world, before matter, before time itself, the Gnostics said there was only the Pleroma, a Greek word meaning fullness, the totality, the divine light beyond all names and forms and concepts, the source that doesn't create because it lacks anything, but because fullness by its very nature overflows. From this Pleroma, divine beings called eons emanated, not created, but emanated. The way light emanates from the sun, and each eon embodied a quality of the divine: wisdom, truth, life, word. They existed in perfect pairs, in perfect harmonic balance, in the unbroken fullness of the divine realm. But one eon acted alone. Her name was Sophia, meaning wisdom, and in her longing, in her reaching toward the source without her divine counterpart, without the balance that the Pleroma required, something slipped. What emerged from that moment of unbalanced reaching was not divine. It was a distortion, a being of partial light, imperfect and unstable and completely unaware that anything existed above it. The Gnostics called this being the Demiurge, the craftsman, and he fashioned the material world in the sincere belief that he was the supreme and only God. he built 7 heavens around it. And in each heaven he placed a subordinate ruler, an Archon, to govern and maintain the structure of the reality he had made. And then the Demiurge tried to create a human being. He had glimpsed a luminous image above him, the true divine human, a reflection of the eons, a blueprint of divine light, and he tried to copy it. But the copy he produced was incomplete, unable to stand upright, unable to hold the life he tried to breathe into it, because the Demiurge could copy the form of the divine, but he could not generate its essence. What he could not have anticipated was that in the act of reaching toward that divine image, in that fumbling, imperfect attempt at imitation, something happened that he did not intend. A fragment of real divine light entered the human form. Not by his design. Against it, the Gnostics called it the divine spark, the pneuma, the piece of the Pleroma now living inside every human being, hidden beneath the layers of everything the Archons have built on top of it. Sleeping, waiting, entirely untouched by the world that surrounds it. And the Archons' entire existence, their entire function, their entire architecture of control, is organized around one imperative: that spark must never wake up, because a soul that remembers what it is cannot be governed. A soul that knows its true origin, that feels, even for a single moment, its connection to the light it came from, is no longer susceptible to the mechanisms of this world. It cannot be kept in the cycle, cannot be managed by fear, cannot be made to serve a reality it now sees clearly as a construct. And so the Archons work, not through armies or chains or anything as obvious as force, but through the mind, specifically through a voice that you already know intimately. Because you've been hearing it your entire life. It's the voice that wakes you at 3 a.m. with the thought you've been trying to outrun. The voice that tells you your best years are already behind you, that the window has closed, that it's too late for the thing you actually want. The voice that appears the moment you sit down to do the work that truly matters and says, with complete and convincing authority, that this isn't going to work, that you've tried before, that you know how this ends, that the evidence of your own past is proof enough. In the Gospel of Philip, one of the texts found at Nag Hammadi, there's a striking description of how the soul's enemies operate. They do not present themselves as enemies. They present themselves as counselors, as helpers, as the reasonable and experienced part of you that is only trying to protect you from disappointment. They wear the face of wisdom. They arrive as caution, as practicality, as the voice that has memorized every wound you've ever carried and knows exactly how to deploy it. And that is precisely what makes them so effective, because you don't fight your own wisdom. You don't question your own caution. You don't interrogate the voice that sounds in every detail like the most sensible part of you. You listen. And in listening, in identifying with the voice, in believing that its words are your words, you give it the only thing it needs to function: your agreement. The Archon has no power of its own. It only has the power you hand it every time you mistake it for yourself. The Apocryphon of John, perhaps the most complete cosmological document found in that clay jar, names the 7 Archons that govern the human psyche, and reading their descriptions, something clicks into place with an almost uncomfortable precision. Because the Gnostics were not describing abstract mythological figures. They were describing the specific psychological mechanisms that operate inside the human mind right now, today, in ways that modern psychology has spent a century trying to map and name. The first is Yaldabaoth, the chief Archon, the one who declared himself the only God. Inside you, Yaldabaoth is the ego at its most defended and impenetrable. The part that cannot be wrong, that rewrites memory to preserve its own narrative, that would rather burn a relationship to the ground than stand in the vulnerability of having made a mistake. It's the voice that says my version of events is the only valid version, that conflates its own perspective with objective truth, that makes the admission of error feel like annihilation. The second is Athoth, the Archon of performed goodness, of virtue worn as armor, In the Gnostic texts, Athoth has the face of a sheep, the perfect disguise of gentleness, concealing something far less gentle. Inside you, Athoth is the help that is really about being seen as helpful, the generosity that keeps a careful ledger, the spiritual practice that is more about identity and presentation than actual transformation. It's the part of you that performs the good person rather than becoming one. The third is Harmas, the Archon of blind perception, what modern psychology would recognize immediately as projection. This is the force that takes what you cannot face in yourself and places it, with devastating accuracy, onto the people around you, so that every quality you judge most harshly in others becomes a map of what you've refused to examine within. The Gnostics understood this dynamic 2,000 years before Freud gave it a name. The fourth is a Brisane, the intellect weaponized, the mind that has learned to use understanding as a form of domination rather than a path toward truth. Inside you, a Brisane is the part that wins arguments instead of seeking clarity, that uses knowledge to elevate itself above others, that has confused the sharpness of the mind with the depth of the soul and mistakes the ability to dismantle for the ability to understand. The fifth is Iao, the Archon of patterns and repetition, and this is perhaps the most recognizable of them all, because Iao is the reason you keep arriving at the same place by different roads, the same kind of relationship in a new body, the same crisis wearing a different costume, the same moment of almost followed by the same retreat, the same self-sabotage, the same inexplicable undoing of everything you'd built. The Gnostics understood that some patterns are not personal failures or character defects. They are architectural, built into the psyche by something that benefits from the loop continuing. The sixth is Sabaoth, the righteous warrior, the Archon that makes destruction feel sacred by wrapping it in the language of justice. Inside you, Sabaoth is the voice that uses moral authority as permission to harm, that has learned the most effective way to silence the inner critic of a destructive act is to convince yourself that the act was righteous, that you were fighting for something good, that the damage you caused was necessary and justified and even, in some sense, holy. The seventh is Adonin, the fire of comparison, the burning and corrosive awareness of what others have that you don't. Inside you, Adonin is the force that takes your genuine potential and slowly consumes it in the endless measurement of yourself against someone else's life, that turns other people's success into evidence of your own failure, that makes the world feel like a competition you are always slightly, perpetually, maddeningly behind in. 7 faces, 7 voices, all of them fluent in your specific language, all of them built from the particular material of your history, all of them wearing your face with an accuracy that makes them almost impossible to distinguish from you, unless you know what you're looking for. And here is the question that changes everything. If these forces were constructed, if they were deliberately installed into the human psyche to prevent the divine spark from awakening, why haven't they simply won? Why, after thousands of years of this architecture being in place, is this knowledge still here? Why does something in you recognize what you're hearing right now? Because the Archons have a fatal flaw, and it is not a small one. They cannot create. This is the central technical claim of Gnostic cosmology, and it carries a very specific implication. The Archons, like the Demiurge who made them, are imitators. They can copy the structure of the divine, replicate its forms, produce extraordinarily convincing facsimiles of light and wisdom and love. But they cannot generate the real thing, because the real thing, the divine spark, the fragment of the Pleroma, is the one element in this entire construction that did not come from them, which means everything they have, every mechanism of control, every psychological chain, every voice and pattern and loop runs entirely on borrowed energy. Your energy, your attention feeds them, your fear feeds them, your unconscious reaction, the automatic response that happens before you've made any choice at all, feeds them. The Archons don't rule through force. They rule through forgetting, because the moment you forget what you are, the moment the divine spark loses awareness of itself and identifies instead with the voice or the pattern or the fear, the Archons have everything they need. A sleeping soul is the only kind they can govern, which is why everything in their architecture is designed for exactly one outcome: to keep the noise loud enough that the silence beneath it never quite breaks through, to keep the voice convincing enough that the one who hears it never thinks to ask, but who is the one who is hearing? That question is the door the Gnostics found. And what they discovered on the other side of it is almost startling in its simplicity, because the Archon within has exactly one vulnerability: it cannot survive being seen. Not fought, not resisted, not suppressed through discipline or drowned out through practice or driven away through force of will, just seen clearly and directly for what it actually is. In the Gospel of Thomas, the most mystical of all the Nag Hammadi texts, the Savior says something that has unsettled readers for 2,000 years. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. What is within you includes the Archon, the voice of not enoughness that has lived in you so long you stop questioning whether it was yours. The pattern that repeats because it has never been fully faced. The fear you've been carrying since before you had words for it. The Gnostic method for dissolving the Archon's power was not exorcism and not warfare. It was illumination. Because darkness, the Gnostics understood at a depth most spiritual traditions have not reached, is not a force in its own right. Darkness is the absence of light, and it doesn't fight the light or resist it or need to be defeated by it. The moment light arrives, darkness simply has nowhere left to exist. And the light the Gnostics were pointing to is not mystical or distant or something you need to earn. It is awareness itself, your awareness. The simple and undramatic act of turning attention toward what is actually happening in your inner world without trying to fix it, judge it, or change it. Just to see it. That is the Gnostic sword, and it works not because it is powerful in any conventional sense, but because it severs the only cord the Archon has, your identification with it. Your belief that its voice is your voice. So what does this actually look like in practice? Not in cosmology, but in the life you are actually living right now. The Gnostics called their practice of inner witnessing Anamnesis, a Greek word meaning the undoing of forgetting, the recovery of what was always already true, and it works like this. You are not trying to empty your mind or achieve a state of calm or become something other than what you are. You are simply turning toward what is already there. The thoughts arise, let them. The voices speak, let them. The fear comes forward, let it. And instead of merging with it, instead of following the thought into the story or agreeing with the voice or contracting into the fear, you do something so small it almost doesn't feel like a practice. You notice. A thought has arisen. Fear is moving through me right now. The voice of not enoughness has appeared again. And then, this is the specific Gnostic move, the one that shifts the entire dynamic. You ask one question: is this me, or is this moving through me? Because the divine spark, your true nature, the fragment of the Pleroma that has been inside you since before this world was built, is not the thought. It is the awareness in which the thought arises. Not the fear, not the voice, not the pattern, not the Archon, the one who notices, the one who is reading these words right now and feeling something resonate in a place that doesn't quite have a name. That resonance is what the Gnostics called gnosis, not belief, not doctrine, not faith in someone else's account of reality, but direct interior knowing, the kind that doesn't need to be defended because it isn't a position. It's an experience. And once you have even one genuine moment of it, one clear glimpse of yourself as the witness behind the voice rather than the voice itself, something in the structure of the inner prison shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but irreversibly. The Gnostics were not describing a personal self-improvement program. They believed that the divine spark in every human being is a fragment of Sophia herself, the wisdom, whose unbalanced longing created the Demiurge, the Aeon whose mistake produced this world of limitation and forgetting, and that her healing, her restoration, her return to the fullness of the Pleroma is somehow bound up with the awakening of every soul she is scattered across. That means your awakening is never just yours. Every time a human being turns toward the Archon within and sees it clearly, every time someone chooses the witness over the voice, awareness over reaction, gnosis over the comfortable darkness of forgetting, something shifts in the larger pattern, something reverberates beyond the individual in ways the Gnostics believed were genuinely cosmic in their significance. This is why those teachers risked everything to preserve these texts. This is why someone wrapped those scriptures in leather, sealed them in clay, and buried them in the Egyptian desert without knowing if anyone would ever find them, because they understood that individual awakening matters beyond the individual, that every spark that remembers its origin adds something to a light that is slowly, across centuries, burning through the architecture of illusion. The Archon within you is ancient, and it has had a very long time to learn your specific language, to catalog your particular fears, to study every moment you were vulnerable and figure out exactly how to use it. But it is not you. It never was. And beneath everything it has built inside the human mind, beneath the noise and the voice and the pattern and the loop, your divine spark is still burning, untouched, undiminished, waiting for the moment you stop running from it and simply turn to look. The Gnostics were called heretics. Their teachers were silenced, their communities destroyed, their texts burned by the thousands, and yet, in a sealed clay jar in a desert cliff in Upper Egypt, their words survived 16 centuries and found their way to you. Maybe the fact that you're here, that something brought you to this video, that something in you recognized the question before the answer arrived, maybe that is not an accident. The Archon within will tell you this is too strange, too mystical, too far outside the acceptable range of what a rational person is allowed to take seriously. Notice that voice. See it. Because that, right there, in this very moment, is exactly what we have been talking about. You don't need to believe anything that was said in this video. You don't need to accept Gnostic cosmology or memorize the names of the 7 Archons, or commit to any particular understanding of Sophia and the Demiurge. You only need to try one thing. Tonight, before you sleep, sit quietly for a moment, not to meditate or achieve anything, just to ask one question. Is the voice in my head actually me? Don't rush toward an answer. Don't reach for a conclusion. Just sit with the question and watch what arises, because the divine spark doesn't need your belief, and it doesn't need you to have the right theology. It only needs your attention. And the Archon's greatest fear, the thing the Gnostic teachers built their entire tradition around, the thing someone risked their life to preserve in that clay jar in the Egyptian desert, is the moment a human soul stops running from the darkness within itself and finally, quietly, without drama or force or any grand gesture at all, turns to look. That is the moment everything changes. That is the moment you begin to remember. If something in this video stirred something in you, leave it in the comments. Every reflection adds light to the whole. Subscribe to Mystic Archives, where every week we go deeper into the forgotten teachings, the buried texts, and the inner pathways that lead beyond the illusion. Because the truth was never something you needed to find outside yourself. It's been burning inside you all along.